Hi everyone, and welcome back to the show. Today I'm talking to Rob Kellaway. He is the head of DataOps at Legal and General Investment Management in London. He's previously held a sort of advising consulting role to the Chief Data Officer and Head of Engineering at Nationwide Building Society, and also the Global Data Engineering Lead at HSBC Bank in previous life. I'm sure there's much more to it than that, Rob, but there's the nice summary for you. Welcome along to the show. Thanks for coming.
Hi, Jason. Thanks so much for inviting me. It's nice to be here.
Yeah, no problem. And of course, you've got this title, Head of Data Ops, and we want to talk about the role that Data Ops plays in successfully delivering data strategies. But Data Ops is a bit of a new term, not necessarily everyone knows what it means. So maybe can we start with you and your role, and then we can get into kind of kicking about Data Ops a bit more and what it means and the value of it and all that good stuff.
Absolutely, Jason. I think it is a bit of a new term that's emerging, in the industry right now. So yeah, data ops. What is it? What's it good for? These are really, important points to really cover. I think naturally when we get new terms arise, there is a little skepticism which can accompany those terms. So is it actually something brand new? Is it something that's been rebadged? I think let's maybe start there. I think. The reality is, I think certainly in my career, we've seen an awful lot of change in the data engineering space and the data space in general. And, data ops is really an opportunity to bring some of those really big, important changes together, under a single banner and give it a kind of a meaning and give it a focus. So, I would start off by saying that really, it's nothing particularly new in itself, but it is actually a combination of three things. So one is certainly, automation. We can't get away from that. There's a level of automation that we haven't really used inside data and data sciences and engineering for a while. I think secondly, there's the agile agenda. So making change happen through agile practice as opposed to traditional SDLC and waterfall approaches. And thirdly is lean manufacturing. So, getting your straight through processing correct, getting your shortest possible distance from left to right, making things efficient. And really, in a nutshell, it's those three things. On top of that, I think there's probably two other elements to it. The first is really a customer focus. So I talk about getting the focus on the right-hand side as being really important. And typically, what we see is that teams are siloed. Typically in large organizations where perhaps you're in a testing team or in a development team, and you tend to focus on those blocks of code or those releases. As opposed to what you're really trying to do, which is create business value on the right. So I think bringing those three things together helps focus on the right. And critically, when we do build things, we build them to operate, right? We're not just getting past the goalposts and going home having done the job, right? We have to live with what we've built. We have to run it, maintain it. And that's a cost that we need to be really clear on. So that's how I see data ops myself.
Okay, and bringing that to sort of you and your role is or the role of leading data ops more generally is therefore the role on making sure all that stuff happens in more of a sort of leadership kind of governance type role, or is it more about hands-on, doing automation, implementing change? Where does it sit in the kind of leading versus doing spectrum?
Yeah, it's a really good point, isn't it? And I think at the moment I'm leading a small team of data ops. Both ends of that spectrum that you're talking to. So there's definitely a need to, hands on the detail, what are we actually looking to achieve here? Which tool sets are we using? What data sets are we looking at? What code are we writing to do this? And then, inevitably, there's the leadership team to work with and show them the value of doing that work. And really, in the 7 months I've been in role so far, we've had some really notable successes. They may not have been the largest use cases on the planet, but they've been meaningful and valuable. Okay. I think that's how you start to get change happening and support for what you want to do.
Well, without a doubt, showing things, doing things, demonstrating is a great way to sort of start that change journey, isn't it? Let's come back to some of those use cases a bit later. I wouldn't mind kind of circling around the data ops concept a bit more. So I think the way you've explained it, sort of that idea of automation, So removing manual and human intervention in as much as possible, I'm guessing there. Agile, which in some respects has had some bad press over a number of years, and as all these kind of concepts do, there's some good stories and some not so good stories, and normally the not so good stories bubble up. But there's something about being agile and iterative, and then the lean manufacturing. It might be a bit newer actually, so I wouldn't mind just talking to you about that for a bit, for people. Which of those would you say is more important, or really is it the combination of those that really drives this idea of data ops?
Yeah, unfortunately, I think it's a combination. But maybe if we take a step back at the moment, Jason, let's just have a think why are we even proposing data ops as being a sensible way forward? Why even talk about it? And I think data is just a really tough thing to get right. A lot of people that I work with, data is just a headache that they can't get rid of. And why is that? And I think if you look at, say, typical digital work or digital transformation work, you typically end up with, control of your left-hand side. So you understand your own data, you change your own data, as you wish. And on the right-hand side, your products that you create is under your own gift, right? You have control of your processes and your data, and you can control your right-hand side product development, product out the door. Whereas in the data scenario, it's not quite so simple, really, in the sense that you're not necessarily in control of your own data. And so that data that you're looking to use, it may be changing. Maybe it's not under your control at all, and it's changing in ways you're not expecting. But somehow you need to keep the products on the right consistent. So I see more and more change, in digital systems. Sourcing data from those systems can be problematic. Keeping a consistent view of that data to then deliver your data products on the right becomes really quite difficult and quite a challenge.
Yeah.
So I think those sorts of, that's the background, and perhaps a differentiator. So is data ops, DevOps for data? Well, I kind of no to that would be my first answer. It's not as simple as that. There are certainly some bits we can carry forward from DevOps, so the automation pieces, but the other pieces are actually quite different. And the lean manufacturing element there, that's a well-worn theory, going back many years to Toyota and Japan, and adopted, throughout the industry. But that's really around straight-through processing. And so what I would say as an example is, if we're taking data into your typical, data lakes type scenario, quite often they're architected with many hops. Data moves many hops through those processes, and perhaps between platforms. Every step of that way introduces opportunity for error. It introduces opportunity for breakage in the process, and often it's not clear what value those hops are actually giving you. So I always have a really strong interest in how many times that data lands between left to right, and is it really necessary to actually instantiate it? Could it live virtually? Could it be a virtualization layer rather than a physical layer? So I think that's all driving the need to get stability in the data, because we're seeing change happening on both left and right. So that's the challenge. And by adding in another layer of focusing on the right hand side, we can get clear value from what we are doing, and frankly please our paymasters. That would be a great thing to do. But also monitor that data, so we can really track through and make sure that proactively we check our data, we validate our data before it lands in the products on the right. So if there are issues, perhaps the team that are responsible for that product, they can take action before the customers actually see that data.
I've got this quite strong opinion that and you kind of touched this at the start about data ops not necessarily being anything new, but just bringing some different things together, is that the way you've articulated what the point of data ops is there, and some of the components of it, really is, for me, not that different from how you should go about delivering your data strategy. So your data strategy is about delivering the right-hand side. It's about delivering business outcomes. It's about delivering business value. And the way you do that through data analytics is by getting the data, moving it through, modeling it, analyzing it, getting insight from it, driving decisions from it, right? That end-to-end chain that you just talked about, and then driving business change, business outcomes, is what data strategy and data more generally is more about. So for me, data ops is kind of like going, here's a bunch of principles that you should apply to delivering data and data strategy in your organization, and we're good to go. That for me, they're kind of two sides of the same coin. And really one is just a way of articulating with a new wrapper around it how to deliver a good data strategy.
Yeah, I think you're absolutely spot on. I mean, there's absolutely strategy and there's execution, and the more we separate them, the more problems that we have. So I think it absolutely is crucial. I think perhaps in the learning here is that in days gone by, perhaps people built grand architectures that that had very stable data sets and required an awful lot of definition up front, and people struggle to really get that value. Particularly in financial services, I think probably in manufacturing, maybe there's a different story there, but in terms of financial services and product development in those scenarios, it's difficult to make those grand architectural plans really land and really provide value, because actually a lot of the value was backloaded. There's so much investment up front. Whereas I think DataOps gives you the ability to take your strategy, right, and iterate quickly. So faster cycle times, more iteration, more learning by doing, which then gives you more confidence that your architecture can be developed as you move forward. So you don't have to keep going back to your architectural roadmap and said, well, 18 months ago, we said we should have a layer that looks like this. Actually, if you do it quickly through faster cycle times, you iterate on that idea and build it to reality far more quickly, but far more safely as well.
So the focus, I think the way you're coming from on that is that the focus for DataOps within a data strategy is on the approach to building technology solutions. I think I call those data products, but the approach to building technology solutions within your data strategy, where we're all focused on the outcome, the right-hand side, as you call it. I think that's the focus. That's the sort of like micro focus for it, right? And how you set yourself up to make that successful.
Absolutely. So that translates into in the really finite detail of getting into sprint planning. And when we talk about our user stories in each of our sprints, are we including user stories relating to, say, data governance, right? So as we build out our data journey, we actually have confidence that our data is the right data that we're using.
Isn't a key part of building good and sound data products and technology solutions about ensuring good quality data, which is all about ensuring you're governing it well. So I think you can't get away from making sure that the way you govern your data, that has to be slick and automated and sound as well, right? So that forms part of DataOps in your mind, yeah?
Absolutely. And in fact, one of the first use cases that we're working on at LGIM and LNG is a way to sort of operationalize our data governance capabilities. Okay. So I probably can't go into that too much detail here, Jason, but it's around making sure that governance is seen as lightweight and value adding, as opposed to governance for perhaps governance sake, which is a difficult sell on most days.
Yes.
So operationalizing that and making that part of your development process gives you a huge amount of value, because you can automate to a degree a level of that, and also allow people to focus on the really value-adding components rather than the sort of like the difficult work underneath.
Yeah. Hey, here you mentioned this at the start in terms of data ops as a phrase. Data gov ops as one that started bubbling up, and that is the danger of these new phrases, is that we start bolting more words on. But I think the principle of data gov ops, which it's not going to stick with me, unfortunately, is exactly what you've just talked about. It's operationalize, it's automate, it's make it slick, it's make it hidden, frankly, it's make it just work. In a way that is efficient to ensure the quality of your data as it moves through the value chain.
Absolutely. I think we could play a good game of buzzword bingo, Jason, on the board if you wanted to. But I think it's all positive that people are talking in those terms, because it's all around operationalizing, and we don't have to do things manually. And I think still people struggle with like manual pipelines of data, pipelines that break overnight unexpectedly, and people having to manually control their ETL. That's still a problem out there. So any sort of debate around how do we make this easier and cheaper to run, that's a good thing.
What's some of the, is DataOps and this approach and these principles more aligned or more beneficial to certain data or business problems, or in fact is this something that just straddles everything and we can apply it in all cases?
I think like anything else, it's going to meet and be best placed in a sweet spot. And there are certainly some areas where it works really, really well, and we can talk a bit about those, I think. There are some areas where it doesn't really fit, and I don't think it should be on the table at all. So if we're talking about perhaps, server farm build outs, infrastructure builds, sort of cloud type activity of that type, I'm not really sure it suits that. I mean, there's a start and an end to those things. They're either there or they're not. Given sort of security requirements are typically around those builds, I would tend to shy away from agility of really, conversation linking to those projects, because I think that it's not necessarily agile as the way to go, and I'm not sure that operationalizing that's really helping you. Sure, there's some automation benefits to be had. I'm not sure in terms of full automation that works. But I think the places where they do work fit really, really well are around production of data pipelines. That's another often used phrase to really mean in terms of a pipeline. Where does it start? Where does it finish? But a couple of use cases we're working with internally at Elgin at the moment are we're driving fully automated left to right definition and build. So what do I mean by that? That sounds a bit strange. So it means literally from sprint and user story development all the way through to the data appearing on a dashboard, that end-to-end journey, we're looking to automate that using DataOps principles. And that's quite a challenge, because we're taking a slice of data, through a complex cycle. Quite often there are some inefficiencies by taking that approach, because ideally the engineers and architects would rather think far more wide scale in terms of how data needs to be held, how data needs to be stored even in those environments. That takes time to do, and often it's done without perfect knowledge of what the requirement is, because let's face it, defining requirements in the data world, pretty hard. I mean, are we really going to hold our stakeholders to signing off requirements in triplicate before we move into development? I don't think that's a fair expectation today. And so if we iterate quickly on the right hand side with our requirements, then we might have some rework to do in sprint plans when we find that we've held data slightly incorrectly. But I think that's part of the cycle, and it actually helps everyone understand the problem. It keeps everyone focused on the right hand side, and we end up with a product and a capability that really meets the business requirement, as opposed to might be meeting, say, an architectural blueprint we created a year ago.
Focus on the right, focus on the outcome, work back from there. I'm a big believer in that. Do you think there's some important, I don't know, either cultural or actual principles in place within an organization that need to be there for DataOps to succeed? So what do I mean by that? So are there, because some of this feels like it can be a change, as you say, focus on the outcome rather than focus on building platforms is something we come up against all the time. So is there certain situations and certain scenarios that work well and DataOps can land successfully? Or do you use DataOps to make that change, or do you just not go there if those cultural things aren't there already?
I mean, for certain, I think nobody wants to be in a position where we're looking for a problem to solve. I think there needs to be acceptance that perhaps things aren't going as well as we wanted to, and we need some help. So I think number one is accepting there's something to fix. So and quite often that comes from frustration. Right, the people who want to use data, who want to create value from data, are either not able to access that data quickly, or perceive barriers in able to use that data. So I think typically that's when I've got involved in my career at various times when people really want to see change, and without that sort of motivation, without a bit of a burning platform, I think it's very hard to see meaningful change take place generally, because that's how organizations operate.
Of course, and that might mean just go faster rather than lots is broken. But either way, you want to improve the status quo, I think, is the key bit.
Either way, and I think people will often talk in terms of cycle time or time to market or product out the door. When are we going to be done? And in data, that's typically been quite a difficult problem, because actually we're never really done in case there's a lot of data. We can carry on refining and improving, until we, for a long time forward. So I think that there is, number one, we've got a problem, we need to fix it. Number two, I think, is that you need to have a culture around that, where people are going to be open to change, and that people can accept that there might be new ways of working that might challenge what they do today. So, and I really like this idea of like an idea meritocracy, where the best ideas, in a team are given the prominence. So it's not around length of service or hierarchy. It's around, well, which are the best ideas that we have. Let's vote on those and work out where we're going to go. And I think that's another sort of challenge, is really getting that sort of people to be, free enough in any organization to think like that can be a challenge. And again, that's about being focused on the right hand side, the customer focused. What's the value of doing this on the right hand side? Without that, a lot of these things, they don't carry quite so much weight.
Does DataOps give a way of valuing the things on the right hand side? You talked about meritocracy and voting for the things that are, that we want to work on, but obviously that needs to be driven by the opportunity it presents to improve things for the organization or the end customer. Does DataOps provide a framework or an approach, or just even a philosophy of how you say, well, this is more valuable than this, and we should focus on it?
Yeah, so I think it helps. I think when we talk about DataOps linking with the ideas around data product and product management, it becomes then really super powerful, because I think the disciplines around product, what is a product, how is a product made up, what components and items exist inside a product. Once we start thinking about those items, we can price those items up quite easily and say, well, this bit of code is going to cost you this much, this reporting tool is going to cost you that much, this pipeline costs this much to run on a daily basis. We can get to those costs pretty quickly. That gives you the sort of like the profit and loss equation for your product, and it also really drives like eureka moments where people go, well, I didn't know that this thing was so expensive to run, or I didn't realize this was so cheap to operate. It drives behavior, which I think really support business missions. So around focus on the right hand side. So I'm a big believer in that product approach, actually, as well as
it's good that that's come up. Sort of product data as a product and product management. Because I almost think you can't do data ops unless you have a mindset of treating data as an output, as a finished good, a product that you can wrap value around. And in order to do that, you need good product management skills. And I think we need a separate podcast episode to deep dive into those two topics. But I think if we put that there for the moment, I think this idea that you just talked about in terms of almost a P&L per product, and whether you can get that granular or just a P&L for a package of output, I think is a great idea. And being able to cut and attribute cost across the work that you're doing in order to see whether a product is profitable. It forces you to go, well, is the dashboard that we built and everyone uses, is it profitable to us? And we may decide it's not a purely monetary thing. We may decide that there are other benefits, but just the concept of going, are we making money and how much does it cost to produce the output? I think it's a great one.
I think it's hugely valuable. And I think what people in the data world don't sometimes always recognize is that when we create a report or a visualization or a dashboard or a piece of data, actually we tend to keep on creating it until someone says stop. And we end up potentially with like huge suites of reports and data which is being fed out, and actually we're not confident if anyone's looking at that data because we're already busy running on to the next project to worry about the next problem. So I think that whole idea promotes people saying there is a cost to running this. It might not be a huge cost always, but there is a cost. There's a human cost of supporting that work and upgrading the infrastructure or whatever it is you're doing. And that often gets overlooked. So,
I think if there's a cost, then it forces you to think about, well, what's the value? Because even if it's a pound, right? It's a pound that isn't being spent somewhere else, and or a dollar. And so it forces you to go, well, if we're going to spend money, you either go, if we're going to spend some money, what do we get back from it? Or there's some sort of a pot of value over here. How much will it cost to get the value? Like whichever way you come at it, you end up kind of having a really grown up conversation about, well, is this worth it? And it forces you to up your game in your assessment and understanding in whether this stuff's worth doing or not. Because if you can't put a number on it, then it probably isn't.
I couldn't agree, Jason. And at the end of the day, this is we're talking about data and data products, but it's a very human experience that we're talking about. And what I've found is the more we talk about the cost of doing this work versus the value, people cotton onto that really quickly, and it's almost become proud and keen to talk about the sort of value they're creating because they know how much cost they're generating when they do it.
Yes.
So people go, I know that actually this report costs 27 cents or pesos or whatever it is we're working in, per iteration. And then using some of the modern cloud techniques, we can get to that level of grain pretty easily. And we can say, well, is it worth, that report, is it worth running? And we get into a conversation that we're really quite proud of the fact we know how much it costs, and we can ask people whether they want that product to exist.
Yeah. And of course, just to take that a step further, you don't always know the value of something until you've tested, taken something small to market, tried it out, looked at whether it's successful. But again, I think with DataOps, it allows you to then iterate quickly. So yes, the first thing was expensive and didn't add much value, but some small adjustments to it, automated quickly, fast time to value, means that we can improve it. And then we can decide, this is just going to cost us money and we're either never going to be able to get the benefit from it, or it's not beneficial, and we can drop it. So I think DataOps gives you that ability, right, to sort of try things, iterate, drop it. If it doesn't work, scale it up if it does.
Absolutely. So we talked before about cycle time, time to market. Those are critical components, and typically in the data analytics world, sometimes those products can take quite a long time to get right. And particularly if you don't follow that agile iteration process, people spend a long time trying to make it perfect. When really what we need to do is start small, get feedback, and build from there at speed.
Yeah. What are some of the watch outs for? So if people are listening, they want to start implementing some of these ideas, these philosophies. What are some of the watch outs for people to miss the landmines as they navigate this world?
Yeah, there's some really sort of gotchas out there that I seem to keep finding over and over again. So. But one is when we talk about automation, I think that I often get a sigh from people when we talk about automation, and I'm not sure why that is. I think people have been oversold possibly, or we've over talked about automation, and people associate that with robotics or RPA. And I think those have been quite challenging to land an organization. So I think it's really clear, it's really important when we start talking about automation, for example, that what we're talking about here is not full-on AI or attempts to land that. We're talking about simple, really time-saving type activities, and also some disciplines around code governance and sort of CI/CD, so releasing code to production quickly and safely. There's some real basic things that we can get right, but automation seems to cause a reaction. I found it's a very interesting one there.
I think you're right. It's the robotics thing, isn't it? I think people hear automation, they think robots in a manufacturing plant, big arms moving to move products around and all the people gone. But as you say, it could be small and that time-saving things within an organization that just improve your ability to deliver your job.
Absolutely. And I think quite often, certainly I've used analogies around Elon Musk and the machine that builds the machine. I think that's quite a nice analogy, but it does engender. We're in a massive factory somewhere in the middle of a desert, building cars. Probably not quite like that in the data context. So I think automation is definitely something to watch out for, but it is key. Absolutely, we get some big wins. Increase our reliability from using automation, and that's important in a production context for analytics and data for certain. I think the other element there is when we introduce changes like this, it can't be one person's responsibility. Quite often, as the head of DataOps, I feel accountability for making it happen. And of course, I am accountable for that, but actually, it needs to be everyone else has to have some say in this, and they have to have their own personal wins in this journey as well. So it's around yes, there is a mission here. We definitely want to get some benefits from it. We see the value in it, but actually, it's also other people may have a different perception of how they can use it, and they should be allowed that freedom to explore it and find the value themselves. So it's bringing people with you on that journey, is incredibly important. And the journey might take a little longer, right, as a result. But actually, we do it then, and we have people with us, and it's becomes like an accepted value-adding activity.
Yeah. How do you do that? Take people along with you. These new things, as you say, that sometimes it's just time and graft, roll up your sleeves, repeat the message. But is there some techniques or some ways that have really helped you, help people understand data ops, the value of it, why it's important, why it will help, that sort of stuff?
Yeah, and I think my particular circumstance is quite interesting. So I joined LGIM in June last year. So I was selected broadly, sat in this room in front of this Mac using Zoom. I was assessed during that period. I had my evaluations in this room, and I've never met anyone, with the exception of one person I knew beforehand. I'd never met anyone in the team physically. It's all been remotely, and I'm challenged and charged with delivering quite a significant set of changes inside the data teams. So it's been really quite an interesting exercise to work out, well, how do we do this remotely? When I don't actually have a relationship with anyone, physically in the sense that we always used to have in the office. Yeah. So it has been quite a problem, really. But I think that the key thing is to make it interesting. Right? Yeah. Actually, there's something worth here. I'm keen to know more, to make it fun, so we can actually enjoy working together and actually make some progress. And the third and the critical thing is to actually celebrate your successes. Right? So when you do get those successful pieces in, they might be quite minor in the scheme of things, but actually, to give people the feeling and the satisfaction of getting work done. And that's why I like the product approach, really, Jason, because we can say that's a product. It's not a data feed that I gave to the regulator. It is actually a fully fledged product. We know what it costs. We know what it does. It's on our register of products, and we can point to it and say, let's do more of that, or let's not do more of that, whatever the case may be.
Yeah, indeed. Cool. Well, I like to make it interesting. I think that's something everyone can learn in whatever field you're in, because you can be passionate about a topic and everyone else could sort of roll their eyes at it. But I think making it interesting, and as you say, you make it interesting by sharing in the success, by setting a picture, telling the story. It sounds like some great ways that you're trying to implement there at LGIM to make data ops work. So look, thanks Rob, for coming on the show. I've spoken to a couple of people now, a few people now on this topic on the podcast. We're seeing more and more interest in it, and more people thinking, hang on a minute, is there something here? Some people are going away and going, all right, yeah, this is just all the stuff that I already knew, and we've packaged it up. And some people are going, this blows my mind in terms of the level of change that we need to implement to make it successful. But I think you've really helped shine a lovely light and a great light on it as a concept, and also the work that you're doing at LGIM. So thanks very much for coming on the show.
Thank you very much, Jason. It's been a pleasure to be talking about it. And I think that you're right. There is a sort of growing interest in the area, and the challenge is really bringing it to life. So I'm hoping I could manage to do that today.
Yeah, we have. And thanks everybody for listening. Really hope you enjoyed this topic of conversation, and there's plenty more to come.